Today, buying one XRP costs you pocket change, a few dollars on any major exchange. Simple, easy, almost too easy. But here's what's about to change everything. Within the next 12 to 24 months, owning a single XRP token could become financially impossible for 99% of the global population. Not difficult, impossible. I know that sounds like sensationalist nonsense designed to get clicks, but there's a fundamental transformation happening in the architecture of global finance right now that makes this warning more real than most people can comprehend. We're not talking about another speculative price pump. We're talking about a complete restructuring of how value moves between nations, institutions, and currencies, and XRP sits at the absolute center of that transformation. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the supply everyone thinks is abundant is actually microscopic. You'll see how institutions are systematically positioning to lock up available tokens, and you'll know the specific timeline when access to XRP shifts from retail availability to institutional exclusivity. This isn't financial advice. This is a structural analysis of what's being built while everyone's staring at price charts. Let me show you what I mean. Everyone points to the same number when they want to tell you XRP can never be valuable, 100 billion tokens. They see that supply figure and immediately think oversupplied, worthless, too many coins in circulation. That assumption is the first trap, and it's exactly what you're supposed to think. The 100 billion number is a distraction from the actual economic reality, which is available liquidity, because most of those tokens aren't sitting in some pool waiting for you to purchase them. Not even close. Let's break down where XRP actually exists. Ripple holds a massive portion in escrow tokens released on a controlled schedule designed to prevent market flooding. Another enormous chunk sits in wallets belonging to original holders who haven't moved their positions in over 10 years. These aren't traders, they're believers who accumulated when XRP was fractions of a penny and have watched every cycle without flinching. Then you've got exchange reserves, which have been steadily declining. Institutional accumulation is quietly draining available supply from public markets. And we haven't even discussed the biggest supply constraint of all, XRP's actual function in the financial system. Think about the infrastructure in your house. You don't think about the plumbing until something breaks. XRP is the plumbing for global finance. It's the lubricant for the international money movement engine. When banks start deploying XRP for cross-border settlements at scale, they're not buying it to hold like retail investors do. They're using it as a bridge asset. They need massive liquidity pools to facilitate billions of dollars moving in seconds. The token has to flow through the system continuously, which means it needs to be available, liquid, and functioning. Now consider this. The SWIFT network currently handles approximately $5 trillion in transaction volume every single day. 5 trillion. That's the system. XRP is positioned to replace or augment. If even a fraction of that daily volume shifts to the XRP ledger, what happens to the 100 billion token supply? It suddenly looks incredibly small. Because to move $5 trillion efficiently using a bridge asset, that bridge asset needs to have sufficient market capitalization and liquidity. Otherwise, there simply isn't enough to go around. This is where the 99% warning starts making mathematical sense. The supply everyone dismisses as too large is actually insufficient for the use case it's being designed to serve. Before we go further, if you're starting to see the bigger picture here, do me a favor, smash that like button right now, drop a comment with your thoughts on XRP's supply dynamics, and make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're breaking down XRP developments that mainstream crypto media completely misses. For years, retail investors have been the primary holders of XRP. We've weathered the SEC lawsuit. We've endured endless FUD campaigns. We've sat through years of price stagnation while watching other assets pump. But that era is ending. The age of retail dominance is being systematically replaced by institutional control. And these institutions don't care about your moonbags or Lambo dreams. They care about efficiency, cost reduction, regulatory compliance, and infrastructure control. Ripple has been building the on-ramps for this institutional takeover for years. Let's talk about RLUSD, Ripple's stablecoin that launched recently. When it was announced, a lot of people panicked. They thought, why would anyone use XRP if Ripple has a stablecoin? Doesn't this replace XRP's function? That reaction reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how bridge assets work in the financial system. The stablecoin is the container. XRP is the fuel and the connector. RLUSD makes it easier for banks and institutions to interact with the XRP ledger without exposing themselves to XRP's price volatility. They hold value in the stablecoin, but the XRP ledger handles the actual settlement infrastructure. Here's the crucial part. Every single transaction on the XRP ledger burns a small amount of XRP. It's destroyed, gone forever. The supply doesn't just stay static, it actively shrinks with usage. Now imagine millions of transactions happening every hour as global banks migrate to this infrastructure. The supply isn't just large and sitting idle, it's actively diminishing while demand from institutional use cases is exponentially increasing. When major institutions need XRP, they're not going to your favorite crypto exchange to market buy like retail traders. They're sourcing from deep liquidity pools, over-the-counter desks, and direct arrangements that never touch public order books. The XRP you hold in your wallet right now represents access to a system that's being gradually walled off from general public participation. You're holding a ticket to infrastructure that's transitioning from open access to institutional exclusivity. Here's the brutal truth about why 99% of people will never own a single XRP. It's not just about price appreciation. It's about the system being designed to shake you out before the real value accrual happens. Psychology is the biggest barrier between retail investors and generational wealth. We've seen this pattern repeat across every major asset cycle in history. When XRP's price starts moving, really moving, most people will sell. If you bought at 50 cents and it hits $5, you're looking at a 10 times return. Your brain tells you you're a genius. You sell to pay off your car, maybe your mortgage. You lock in life-changing gains. But then XRP hits $50, then $100, then $500. And by the time the real institutional price discovery happens, retail holders have already handed their tokens back to the very banks that need them for liquidity pools. Because here's what people don't understand. The banks want your XRP, they need it, and they will use every tool in their arsenal to make sure you don't hold on to it. Scary headlines, regulatory uncertainty, price manipulation, extended periods of consolidation that bore you to death, all designed to test your conviction and shake out weak hands. We're living through that testing period right now. The people who understand what's happening realize that XRP isn't a stock. It's not even a currency in the way Bitcoin represents digital gold. It's a piece of critical financial infrastructure. If you owned a small percentage of the internet's fiber optic cables in 1995, would you have sold them because they didn't appreciate for 3 years? Of course not. You'd recognize that the world was still being connected, infrastructure was still being deployed, and the real value would emerge once the system went live. That's exactly where we are with XRP. The infrastructure is being built, the regulatory framework is being established, the institutional partnerships are being formalized, and retail investors are being tested on whether they understand the actual value proposition or whether they're just chasing short-term gains. Let's get into the technical mechanics of why experts are making this claim about XRP scarcity. It comes down to value standardization in a multipolar financial world. The global financial system is moving away from dollar dominance, not because the dollar is collapsing, though inflation is certainly eroding its purchasing power, but because the world is demanding alternatives to correspondent banking systems that are slow, expensive, and politically weaponized. Every local currency on Earth is facing inflation pressures. The old guard of international finance needs a way to move value that doesn't rely on a single nation's currency and doesn't require the 3 to 5 day settlement times of traditional banking rails. If XRP becomes the global bridge asset, the neutral settlement layer that no single country controls, its price is no longer determined by retail speculation. It's determined by the total amount of value it needs to transport across borders. Let's do the math. If the global financial system needs to move $100 trillion in cross-border value annually, and there are only a few billion XRP tokens available in active liquidity pools, the price must rise to a level that provides sufficient liquidity for those transactions. At current prices around $2.50, the entire XRP market cap is roughly $140 billion. That's insufficient to handle even 1% of global cross-border flows efficiently. The math demands a significantly higher valuation. At that point, XRP won't be something you casually buy on a Sunday afternoon while browsing your exchange app. It will be held by central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and massive multinational corporations as a reserve asset for international settlement. For a regular person to own even one full XRP token would be like a regular person today trying to own a physical share certificate of critical Swift infrastructure. It simply won't be available for retail purchase. The tokens will exist in institutional custody, working continuously as bridge liquidity, generating yields through automated market makers, and functioning as the oil that keeps the global financial engine running. Now I need to pause here and make something crystal clear. I am not a financial advisor. This video is purely for educational and entertainment purposes. The cryptocurrency market is extraordinarily volatile, and you could lose everything you invest. You must conduct your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making any financial decisions. Your money is your responsibility, and these are high-risk speculative markets. The warning we're discussing is based on a specific vision of the future where Ripple succeeds, where the XRP ledger becomes the global standard, and where the world's financial elite adopt this technology at scale. While many signs point in that direction, nothing is guaranteed. You need to be completely comfortable with the risks before you even consider the potential rewards. Hit that like button if you're still with me, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more deep analysis on XRP that goes beyond surface level price predictions. One of the most overlooked developments in the XRP ecosystem is the automated market maker functionality that was added to the XRP ledger. This is a massive upgrade that allows anyone to provide liquidity and earn yields in return. But consider what this does to the effective circulating supply. When you deposit your XRP into an AMM liquidity pool, those tokens are actively working. They're providing the liquidity infrastructure for trading pairs. They're facilitating swaps. They're earning fees. Most importantly, they're not sitting on an exchange order book ready to be sold at the click of a button. They're locked in functional use. As more retail holders and institutions discover they can earn yields by providing liquidity, the available supply of XRP for new buyers shrinks dramatically. We're moving toward what I call a liquidity black hole. The more the network gets used, the more XRP gets pulled out of open markets and into productive roles within the ecosystem. This is how you create a genuine supply shock. It's not just about holders refusing to sell, it's about the asset being deployed into use cases that make it functionally unavailable for casual trading. Think about staking in proof-of-stake networks. Once tokens are staked, they're locked. They can't be sold without unstaking, which often has waiting periods. XRP's AMM creates a similar dynamic, except instead of just earning staking rewards, the tokens are providing critical infrastructure liquidity that the entire network depends on. If you want to understand how AMMs work, how institutional bridge liquidity functions, and how these technical mechanisms create scarcity, you need to be tracking this information in real time. The casual observer looking at price charts is missing the entire structural transformation happening beneath the surface. For years, the SEC has been positioned as the villain in the XRP story. They sued Ripple, claiming XRP was an unregistered security. They effectively froze the asset's growth in the United States while the rest of the world continued building on XRP infrastructure. But here's a question worth considering. Was the lawsuit just a legal battle, or was it strategic delay by design? While retail investors were distracted by court filings and Twitter drama about the case, what was actually happening behind the scenes? Ripple was opening offices in Dubai, Singapore, and London. They were forming partnerships with the Central Bank of Ireland and the National Bank of Georgia. They were building the financial bridge for the global south, while everyone in the US was arguing about securities law. The lawsuit acted as a filter. It scared away weak hands who couldn't handle regulatory uncertainty. It kept out institutional money that operates under strict compliance frameworks and can't touch legally questionable assets. But now that legal clarity has emerged, with the court ruling that XRP is not a security when sold on secondary markets, the floodgates are opening. The institutions that were sitting on the sidelines waiting for regulatory green lights are now entering the market. The window to buy cheap XRP existed during the confusion. It existed during the boring consolidation periods when nothing seemed to be happening. But once that confusion clears and once the boredom ends, the price will reflect the underlying reality. And the reality is mathematical. There is not enough XRP for everyone who will eventually want exposure to own even a single token. There's a theory that used to be dismissed as conspiracy speculation, but is now being discussed in serious financial circles. XRP is being positioned as a world reserve asset, not a currency you'd use to buy groceries. A reserve asset that banks use to back their own digital currencies and facilitate international settlement. If every country launches a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, or some form of sovereign stablecoin, they need a neutral, decentralized bridge asset to trade between these various national digital currencies. They can't use the US dollar if they want true financial independence. They can't use each other's currencies because of trust issues and geopolitical tensions. They need a mathematical bridge, an asset that no single country controls, that moves at the speed of light, and that has a fixed maximum supply. XRP fits that description perfectly. It's designed for speed, efficiency, and interoperability. It's not controlled by any government, and its supply is capped at 100 billion tokens with a deflationary burn mechanism built in. If central banks start holding XRP on their balance sheets as a reserve asset for international settlement, the idea of a retail investor owning even one XRP becomes almost absurd. Do you personally own a gold bar held in the Federal Reserve's vault? Some people do, but the vast majority don't. You might own paper representations of gold or a tiny fraction through an ETF, but actually holding the physical asset is rare. That's reserved for institutions and the architects of the financial system. That's the future we're potentially looking at with XRP. Institutional custody, institutional use cases, and institutional exclusivity. Let's talk about how this transition actually happens from a technical infrastructure standpoint. It comes down to ISO 20022, the new global standard for financial messaging. This is essentially a new language that all of the world's banks are migrating to. It replaces the old Swift messaging format with a more data-rich, structured communication protocol that allows for better tracking, compliance, and interoperability. XRP was one of the very first crypto assets to achieve ISO 20022 compliance. This isn't just a technical detail to gloss over. It means the XRP ledger can communicate seamlessly with the global banking system using the same standardized messaging that banks are now required to use. When a bank in Tokyo wants to send value to a bank in Brazil, they no longer have to deal with multiple intermediary banks, correspondent relationships, and days-long settlement times. They can use the XRP ledger to facilitate that transfer in seconds, using a language that both institutions understand natively. We're watching the wiring of a new financial system happen in real time. Most people are staring at price charts on their phones, wondering why XRP hasn't pumped 10% today, completely missing the fact that the entire foundation of global finance is being rebuilt on top of the technology they're holding. This is the multi-year setup for the XRP story. We know the technology works. We know banks are piloting it. We know regulatory clarity is emerging. The only question left is, How much of this infrastructure will remain accessible to the general public once the system fully activates? The compliance advantage XRP has through ISO 20022 integration means it's not competing with other cryptocurrencies for speculative retail attention. It's competing with SWIFT for control of the $5 trillion in daily international settlement volume. That's a completely different game with completely different stakes. To be in the 1% who actually hold on to their XRP through the coming transition, you have to fundamentally change how you think about money and wealth. Most people view cryptocurrency as a vehicle to accumulate more fiat currency. They want more dollars, more euros, more yen. They're measuring their crypto success by how much government-issued paper currency they can eventually convert their holdings into. But the experts issuing warnings about XRP's scarcity see things differently. They view fiat currencies as sinking ships, losing purchasing power to inflation year after year. They see XRP as infrastructure for a new system, a lifeboat, if you will, for preserving and moving value in a multipolar financial world. If you're waiting for XRP to hit a certain price so you can exit back to dollars, you're essentially trading a fixed supply infrastructure asset for a limitless supply debt instrument that's losing value every year to inflation. The 99% who will sell are focused on the exit strategy. The 1% who will hold understand that XRP isn't something you exit from, it's something you exit to. In a future where everything is tokenized, real estate, stocks, commodities, even identity credentials, the network that moves those tokens between parties will be the most valuable infrastructure on the planet. We're not talking about speculative appreciation anymore. We're talking about owning a piece of the plumbing that the entire tokenized economy runs on. That requires a complete mindset shift from short-term trading mentality to long-term infrastructure thinking. And most people psychologically cannot make that shift, which is precisely why they'll sell too early and miss the real wealth creation. We're approaching what I call the point of no return. The warning isn't about a market crash, it's about a market lockout. There will come a day, possibly sooner than you expect, when you open your favorite crypto exchange to buy XRP and discover that liquidity simply isn't available at reasonable prices. The spread between bid and ask will be so wide that it's economically prohibitive to accumulate meaningful positions. More likely, exchanges will shift to selling tokenized fractions of XRP, similar to how most people today don't own a whole Bitcoin, they own Satoshis, tiny fractions of a coin, but Bitcoin is primarily a store of value. XRP is infrastructure with active utility. The demand for that utility from the institutional world will eventually far outweigh the supply available to retail markets. We've already seen the beginning of this transition. Exchange reserves of XRP have been declining for months. Institutional accumulation is happening through OTC desks that don't report to public order books. The available supply visible to retail traders is shrinking in real time. If you're holding XRP right now, you're not just an investor making a speculative bet, you're a pre-institutional participant in a system that hasn't fully activated yet. You're positioned ahead of the curve, assuming you understand what you're holding and have the conviction to maintain that position through volatility and uncertainty. The story of XRP is often framed as Ripple versus regulators or XRP versus other cryptocurrencies, but the real story is much bigger. It's the old financial system versus the new financial system. The old world is slow, expensive, and exclusive, dominated by correspondent banking relationships and geopolitical power dynamics. The new world being built on the XRP ledger is fast, cheap, and potentially even more exclusive once the gatekeepers fully understand what they control. You have the opportunity right now to be part of the 1% who recognize this transition, but it requires more than just buying tokens. It requires understanding the why behind the technology, the structural changes happening in global finance, and the timeline for when this shifts from potential to reality. Before we wrap up, smash that like button if this analysis resonated with you. Comment below with your thoughts on XRP's institutional future. And subscribe to this channel because we're tracking these developments daily, while most creators are just reacting to price movements. The warning is simple, but the implications are profound. Don't let the abundance of today blind you to the scarcity of tomorrow. 100 billion tokens might seem like an enormous supply, but in a world of 8 billion people and $400 trillion in global wealth, 100 billion is actually a drop in the ocean, especially when that drop is the only thing that can efficiently make the ocean move. We're currently in the transition phase from retail speculative asset to global institutional standard. This is the dark, confusing valley that every transformational technology goes through. It's frustrating, it's boring, and it's specifically designed to make you give up and move on to something more exciting. But on the other side of this transition is a revelation that will fundamentally reshape the financial landscape. The question isn't whether XRP will succeed in this role. The question is, when that success materializes, will you still be holding your position? Or will you be part of the 99% watching from the sidelines, wondering how you let this opportunity slip through your fingers? This is the warning. What you do with it is entirely up to you. Take time to genuinely educate yourself on how the XRP ledger works. Understand the difference between speculation and infrastructure investment. Stay connected with communities that are tracking real developments rather than just price predictions. Remember that in the world of high-stakes finance, the biggest structural moves happen when nobody's paying attention. The infrastructure gets built during the boring times. The wealth gets created during the confusion. And by the time it's obvious to everyone, the opportunity has already closed. Don't be the person who sold the future to pay for the present. The 99% who will never own one XRP isn't a prediction of failure. It's a prediction of ultimate utility adoption. And in the world of value creation, utility is the only thing that actually endures. Make sure you're positioning yourself on the right side of this transition. The gates are still open. The opportunity is still accessible. But that window is closing faster than most people realize. Stay sharp, do your research, keep your eyes on the infrastructure being built because that's where the real transformation is happening. For now, hit that like button one more time, subscribe if you haven't already, and check out the next video queuing up because we're going even deeper into XRP's institutional adoption timeline. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.